Japan has suffered more than most from the Great Depression following the fateful Wall Street crash. The population was booming, with more than 1 million mouths to feed every year. Based on the far eastern edge of Asia, Japan was an incredibly isolated country until it needed to open up trade to receive necessary materials like oil and coal. It had virtually no natural resources of its own to exploit, and was reliant on international networks to import its goods. Into 1930, unemployment was high, and agricultural failures brought about a famine in large sections of rural communities.
General public's life was very hard in those days, and most of the young military officers came from low-class agricultural families, and agriculture was in a very, very hard position.
1930年、昭和5年ですね。5年頃は
1930 was the time when Japan entered what might be called her convulsive period of history.
まだ陸軍はそれほど強い力はなかったけれども。
The influence of the ultra-nationalists grew,
例えば右翼の
and such incidents as the Young Officers' Revolt of May 15 placed Japan step by step under the power of the military. The politicians took second place to the army.
The army also controlled the education system, and the administration of martial art techniques was compulsory from a very early age. To the Japanese, Emperor Hirohito was nothing less than a god, but Hirohito was not governed by his divine beliefs, but his advisors. A weak man, Hirohito was easily manipulated into sanctioning Japanese expansionism. The generals believed territorial gain in Eastern Asia would benefit the great empire of Japan. Korea was already Japanese, and after the 1905 Tsarist-Russian War, Japanese troops were permitted to stay in Manchuria. Manchuria was mostly barren, but it was rich in resources that Japanese desperately needed for its economy. This was ideal for Japanese resettlement, resources, and elimination of the Chinese subhuman race. Impatient extremists in Japan were concerned that the leaders in Tokyo would not act to take Manchuria, so in 1931 they infiltrated Japanese garrisons in Manchuria and persuaded them to take on Manchuria's feeble army, on the pretense that Manchurian people had sabotaged Japanese-owned railways in the country. The explosion on the railway line became known as the Mukden incident of September 1931. Now was the time for the mighty League of Nations to prove its power. After China appealed to the League consulted the Japanese ambassador in Geneva, who relayed the information stated by Tokyo, that the military had hot-headed members and that the army would withdraw. The army had other plans. The Chinese forces were now decimated, and soon Japan controlled the entire province by February 1932. So what did the League of Nations do now? The League decided to dispatch Victor Buer-Lytton to generate a report on the causes of the Mukden incident. It took the best part of a year to make. In his dossier, Lytton referred to the unsatisfactory administration of Manchuria before 1931, the development of the Manchu state, Japanese interest in the region, Russian interests in the region, and a series of ways to approach the crisis. The chief purpose, to find the cause of the Mukden incident, was never actually addressed. In the end, it concluded Japan should leave Manchuria and become a semi-independent nation free from China and Japan. This was Japan's reaction.
nations.
Japan, however, finds it impossible to accept the report adopted by the Assembly.
And so Japan leaves the League. The Far Eastern war cloud casts its shadow over the whole world.
Japan had successfully taken Manchuria, and with it, its leave from the League of Nations. The League had lost its greatest power in the Far East, and Japan was to keep Manchuria because no one would physically intervene. It could now turn its scope on the whole of China, who had long believed their Great Wall could prevent any intruder. But the incident of Manchuria had far greater reaches than the Asian fallout. It demonstrated that the League could be bypassed, like in Corfu 1923, but further that if a country felt it didn't like the League ruling, it could simply leave and keep its reign of terror. It exposed the fallibility in the system, which would later be exploited in Abyssinia and in Germany.